was 20 killers, so I will make a part 2 depending on the video. I probably will just make it regardless because I enjoy doing this. But there'll be a part 2 with the other 20 killers. So yeah, it'll probably be a bit longer because killer lore tends to get longer with time. But yeah, hope you guys enjoy. If you do, remember to like and subscribe. Hopefully this time as well we can do a survivor part of this series as well, and then just go from there. But yeah, I will stop waffling on that now. Hope you guys enjoy. The Trapper. Evan McMillan idolised his father. It wasn't that he was an heir to a great fortune, it was the way he ran the estate. Raised under a firm hand, Evan had taken to running the workforce with an iron hand. Production was always high, and the McMillan estate prospered under father and son. As Archie McMillan's mental health slowly disintegrated, Evan protected him from the herd who wanted a piece of his fortune. No matter what his father asked of him, Evan would do. When Archie McMillan finally snapped, Evan became his enforcer in what would be known as the worst mass murder in modern history. They never proved that Evan led over 100 men into those dark tunnels before detonating the explosives and sealed them to their fate. The tale of the McMillan estate is a tale of wealth and power gone very wrong. How many victims fell to the hands of the father and son is unknown. No record is ever made of Evan McMillan. His father is another unsolved puzzle, found trapped in the locked basement of his own warehouse, starved and abandoned. The Wraith. Philip Ojomo came to this country without anything other than hope for a new beginning. He was happy as he got offered a job at Autohaven Records, a small scrapyard where bribed cops turned a blind eye for the somewhat shady business that took place. Ojomo didn't care. He had seen criminal activity up close in his homeland, and as long as he didn't get involved, he let things be. He just fixed cars and handled the crusher, something he did really well. A car went in and a small metallic cube came out. It was not until one gloomy day that he, just by accident, saw some blood coming from one of the uncrushed cars. As he opened the trunk, he found a young man gagged and with his hands tied. With panic-filled eyes, Ojomo freed the man who managed to run 10 feet before Ojomo's boss stopped him and slit his throat. As Ojomo demanded answers, he couldn't explain to him that he had been nothing more than a simple executioner, as more or less every guard has soul in them. As this was the service the scrapyard provided to certain clients, Ojomo snapped and went ballistic. He threw his balls in the crusher and let it slowly compress. As the head stuck out, Ojomo grabbed it and pulled the head and spine out of the body. Then he left and was never seen again. The Hillbilly. The son of wealthy landowners Max Thompson Sr. and Evelyn Thompson, this unnamed boy was an unwanted child born to savage parents. Lisa Sherwood grew up in a quiet village, mainly isolated from the rest of civilization. The people of the hamlet were kind, and the elders kept old traditions alive, often keeping the peace by personally settling the ever-rare disputes. Lisa was particularly fond of the charms they told her to draw for safety and good fortunes. One night, as she was walking home through the woods, a terrible storm struck without warning. Howling winds whipped practices as a way of surviving. Years passed, the horror was buried, and victims mercifully forgot. Then, somehow, Freddy returned, and dreams became nightmares once again. Freddy focused his anger on those he felt had wronged him, building up a true obsession, Nancy Holbrook, but he underestimated her strength and resourcefulness. Together with her friend, Quentin Smith, she managed to weaken Freddy, mutilating him and leaving him dead once more. Death didn't want Freddy the first time he encountered it. Why did they think it would take him now? He emerged once more, consumed with vengeance. Then he turned his sights on the boy who blocked his path to Nancy. His number one. Freddy invaded Quentin's dreams, terrorizing him night after night, until his strength and defenses would be at their lowest. When the time was right, he forced the boy to return to the dark reflection of Madame Briscoe. Here he would take his final revenge. Freddy stalked the boy through the school halls. He took his time savouring every moment of that. That is what he enjoyed the most, the smell of sweat in the air, the ragged gasp of their terrified breath. They were his to toy with. There was a boy at the end of the long corridor, too scared to run anymore, resigned to his fate. Freddy closed in, arms wide, claws raking the walls. Their tips traced along a pipe, metallic shrieking, only added to the boy's apprehension. A shower of sparks rained on the floor, and into the liquid that covered the tiled floor. A blue flame blossomed and quickly engulfed the room. The boy took flight as Freddy burst from the flames in a fury. Rooms and walls raced past in a blur until they were in Freddy's basement. There was no room to escape from here. Slowly, Freddy closed in on the boy. His fear was so strong that Freddy could almost taste it, but his eyes burned with a defiant hatred that was almost admirable. Freddy drew back his claws. Then Freddy felt another presence with him, something old, powerful, and dark. A miasma enveloped him, and the only sensation was like a wooden flag sinker creaking in the distance. The echoing groan of metal crushed against metal, something arcane and unknowable, halfway between language and pure terror. A moment of falling and spinning, and then Freddy was back in school, but not his school. It looked the same, but it felt different. His powers were tempered with in some ways, and focused in others. The boy had gone now, but another brave walked the hallways. Some would be inconsequential, others would be his new favourites. All would fall before his claw. The Pig. When John Kramer, better known as Jigsaw, planned for his son to be born during the Chinese zodiac year of the pig, he wanted to represent fertility and rebirth, a new beginning for him and his wife, and the start of a charmed life for his son. But that plan was shattered on the night that a junkie broke into his wife's clinic, hoping to score. After this event resulted in the death of his unborn son, John finally caught up with the junkie, making him his first test subject, and the pig was changed forever too. It became a representation of the disease that was rotting John from the inside, a reminder that we are just meat unless we elevate ourselves by our actions. By grasping life from the jaws of death, the pig became a vessel, an agent of Jigsaw, conveying the subjects to their test. For some of those who emerged victorious, the pig could still be rebirthed into the lives of as apprentices, even disciples of Jigsaw. That was the case for Amanda Young, a troubled soul, whose life had been a catalogue of harm, both to herself and those around her. That changed when she faced and bested Jigsaw's test. Deciding her life was worth something, she became devoted to Jigsaw's cause, ready to take over when cancer consumed him. But she became more dependent on John. Her anguish at his impending death combined with her belief that their test subjects were incapable of saving themselves, of being reborn in the crucible of the games. Seeing this, John presented her with another test, another chance to save herself, but Amanda let her rage and jealousy rule her actions. She failed the test and took a bullet as a consequence, bleeding out on the tiled floor. Darkness engulfed Amanda's vision, accompanied excelling at trying events but shunned any attempts to coax him into team support. On his walk home from school, he would often find feathers on the ground and soon began a collection, keeping them in a cigar box under his bed. With his father, he wrote work on an alcoholic-induced stupor. Kenneth had to spend hours alone, transfixed by the regularity of the feathers' barbs and the feeling of softness as he ran them over his lips. Watching the birds that came to the feeder in the garden, he imagined how soft it must be, and resolved to catch one. He integrated himself with the local dentist, soon procuring some anesthetic. Using this, he rigged up a trap on the feeder that he hoped would knock out a bird for long enough that he could touch it. After a few failed attempts, he managed to trap a robin. As he lay his hand, he suddenly felt a rush of a life at his mercy. He had planned to release it once he recovered from the anesthetic. Instead, as his eyes flickered back into consciousness and began to struggle, his grip remained firm. His fingers slowly tightened around his throat, squeezing until his chest feathers were finally still. He disposed of the body, keeping just a feather, which he started a new collection, discarded the others as fake. By the late 1940s, Kenneth had left school and started working as a busboy at a local diner. He had also escalated to larger prey like squirrels, raccoons, and dogs, becoming skilled at customizing the anesthetic dosage for each. By 1954, a young man went missing in the town and the town was turned upside down in search. A few months later, Kenneth's father, while doing some work in the crawl space under the house, found a cigar box. He broke it open and saw to his horror that it contained feathers, animal paws, and a man's finger. Returning from work, Kenneth saw his father leaving the crawl space with a cigar box in his hand. He turned on his heel and never went home again. After a few weeks living rough, he encountered a traveling circus, and with his prodigious strength, he was hired to work the ropes. He assumed a new name, Jeffrey Hawk. Suddenly, surrounded by a closely knit community, Jeffrey had learned to socialize. He had donned the new personality like a disguise, quickly becoming known as charming and helpful, and was welcomed into his new family. Over the next decade, he stayed with the circus, traveling the length and breadth of the United States, but the internet life provided few repercussions. He fell into bad habits, drinks, junk food, drugs, he indulged in all of them in excess. For a time, these vices were enough, but then his old urges returned and his nomadic existence became a cover for him to resume killing. He stole clothes and makeup from performers, fashioning a disguise that would let him get close to his victims before he anesthetic, bringing them back to his caravan where they would wait to find themselves bound and at his mercy. He would finally get to have his fun, mentally and physically torturing them, their screams fueling before being lost in the night. Once their strength was at its lowest, he would carefully examine their fingers, searching for the prettiest, running them over his tongue to find the tastiest. Once he found the best, he would cut it from their hand and proudly add it to his collection, disposing of the rest of the body as pointless waste. Men, women, young, old, he didn't care. The essence of a good collection is in its variety, in the memories and stories they evoke. He removed the costume less and less, shedding his whole personality with it, fully embracing the clown as his true self. With time, he became complacent and sloppy. A victim managed to work free of her bindings while he was sleeping off the drink. She escaped, screaming for help, and he awoke to find the rest of the circus bearing down on him. He whipped his horse in the caravan and disappeared into the night. Since then, he had roamed the country, a parasite who could never be found at a carnival or circus, but who would never be seen on any playbill. He lured the brave or foolish enough to come near, trapped them and moved on before they could be found missing. Somewhere along the way, he left the ordinary roads of the United States behind him, traveling through a veil of mist and entering a new realm. It was a place of transience and impermanence, perfectly suiting the life he had chosen to lead. Feeling more at home than he had in his entire life, he set up camp and waited for his first visitor. The Spirit. Rin was the only child of the Yamaoka family. She was raised in the dusty halls of a traditional house in Kagawa. She studied education at Takamatsu, a private university which weighed heavily on her family's shaky finances. Her mother got ill that year and the bills started piling up. Rin worked part-time in a futile effort to help lighten the load. Her father sharp katana came crashing down. Rin blocked the blade which bit into her bare forearm. The shock of recognition interrupted her pain. Her father was wielding the katana with a stoic expression. She cried out to make him stop, but he slashed her arm again. She slid off. She rushed off and slid on the blood-smeared floor. Using the door frame as support as she raised herself up, the katana ripped through the wall, cleaving her other arm. She screamed in pain as she limped into the hallway, only to be met by her father's blade. She stepped back, trembling, as she held together the soft, loose flesh of her abdomen. Images of her mother's tangled limbs flashed before her eyes. Rin charged at her father, making him stumble back. He punched her torn abdomen, and she recoiled in pain. As she struggled to get back up, he slashed her thigh, making her collapse to the floor. As she crawled towards the stairs, he grabbed her hair and yanked her against a partition. The glass shattered on impact as she fell through, landing one floor down. She heard footsteps somewhere above her. With effort, she moved, worming her way into a sea of broken glass. The shards gnawed at her, ripping her flesh. He had to be stopped. He would not get away with what he had done to her, with what he had done to her mother. Coughing up blood, her chin grazed the glass, adding to the bleeding. A low-pitched heartbeat started to ring in her ears. Her body felt so heavy she could no longer move. The ground shook with her father's footsteps. She knew that she was not going to make it. She no longer cared. She was going to make him pay. In this life or the next, a dark fog slowly veiled her eyes. She could not subdue her rage. She would not rest. Not yet. The darkness whispered, promising blood and revenge. An oath was made, and Rin closed her eyes. The Legion. Frank Morrison was 19 and had little to show off for it. He stopped attending school after being kicked out of the basketball team for shoving a referee into the stands. Yet Frank was a man of potential, who could light up a room despite his bleak childhood. At 6 years old, he had been taken away from Calgary to start a circuit of foster homes. No matter how many times he lashed out through tantrums and got into fights, they kept moving him to new, unfamiliar houses. His last move had been 3 years prior to when his last foster dad, Clive Andrews, had picked him up from the adoption centre. They'd been on the road for 7 hours before reaching a small bungalow in Ormond. It was the longest time they spent together. Clive was too busy trading checks for family services for drinks at the bar. Ormond was a small, stale place, a remote town of 6,000 inhabitants, where grey winters drag on for most of the year. Frank did everything he could to get into another adopted family, but he changed his mind when he caught the attention of Julie, a beautiful girl who was convinced that she deserved a better life in Ormond, and Frank, as an outsider, was a ticket out. Frank attended the party she threw where everyone was younger than him and easily impressed, which he liked. He met the impulsive Joey who liked to show off, and the shy, naive Susie, who was Julie's best friend. They would hang out at an abandoned lodge up in Mount Ormond. Their time together was a perfect break from the boring conformity of the small, insignificant, everyday lives. Frank saw it as an opportunity to shape their lack of experience into something powerful. He lined up nights of debauchery and rampage, testing their limits. Bullying, vandalism, and theft were essentially their weekend plans. It came to a point where they would do anything he asked. Nothing was off limits when they put their masks on. One evening, Frank dared Joey to vandalize a store that had recently fired him. They snuck inside easily enough, as the building was supposed to be empty after closing hours. But a cleaner who was still there grabbed Julie as she came near. Hearing her stifled cries, a dark impulse took over Frank. He rushed to her aid, knife in hand, and without hesitating, planted the knife into the cleaner's back. As the group stared at Frank in shock, he ordered them to finish the job. Joey clenched his jaw, grabbed the knife, and stabbed the bleeding man in the ribs. Susie didn't want to do it. Frank shouted at her. They had to finish what they started. Julie closed her eyes and slid the knife into the man's chest. She handed the wet blade to Susie. They were all in this together now. Susie stared at Julie in disbelief as Frank grabbed her trembling hands and inserted the knife into the man's throat. Frank told them they had to move fast. They mopped the blood off the floor, stashed the body in the trunk of Joey's car, and drove up to Mount Ormond. All four were digging in the muddy snow to dispose of the body when Frank spotted something moving in the woods. He grabbed his knife and broke from the group to check it out. The fog thickened around Frank, becoming so dense that he could no longer see ahead. He retraced Susie and Joey did not return to home that night. Their parents thought they'd run away with Frank. Each family came up with a different theory. The mood changed in that town, however, when a body was found up by the abandoned lodge in Mount Ormond. The plague. When she was 5 years old, Adidas, the youngest of a family of 7, was left on the brick-red burning steps of the Temple of Purgation at the centre of Babylon. To process her shock and sorrows, she held on to the beliefs that the gods had a plan for her. Her new life was one of quiet servitude. She would tend the gardens, prepare ceremonial meals, and polish ceremonial incense burners. At night, she would pray for a sign that would reveal her purpose. When she came of age, she attended the high-ranking priests during the yearly worshipping of the sea goat, the god of water and creation. Swinging a censer down the great hippo-style wall, she gasped thick black fumes that reached the cold, narrowing stone pillars before dissipating. Her worries lifted, and the resulting bliss made her feel closer to the gods than ever. She worked herself to the bone each day that followed, fulfilling her duties while taking on the new ones. As she aided the priests through the purification rituals, the priests were more and more in need of assistance. Cleansings were being performed daily to answer the demand for the outside of the high temple walls. When a catastrophic plague had resurfaced, within months the priest had contracted the disease. It did not take long before they too became too weak to perform any types of rituals. Adiris, having assisted many purification rituals, was the only one able to carry on. The swelling panic had to be contained, even if it by a novice. Anxious before her first ceremony, Adiris visited the priest's sanctuary chamber. When she lit the candle, she noticed a narrow opening at the back. Sliding through the gap, she reached a crypt hidden under the sanctuary. The chamber was bare, except for the golden statue of a woman who stood with outstretched hands, her fingers covered in jewels. It was a sign that Adiris had been waiting for. The great hall was packed with followers who bowed to Adiris as she entered. She strode to the brick altar and grabbed a ceremonial dagger forged in silver. Her ruby-ringed fingers wrapped around the blade like claws. The sudden display of luxury intrigued the followers, who were struck by her youth and beauty. As she began to recite in the epic of creation, a woman in black swooned and collapsed. Adiris rushed to her and noticed the black blisters covering her feet. Without hesitation, Adiris grabbed her sacred blade and swung it at her own foot, severing her toe. She then offered the bloody part to the gods, asking them to protect the woman. A silence fell over the followers, who revered Adiris as her new priestess. Tales of her wealth, beauty, and devotion began to spread across the city as quickly as the disease. Adiris' followers called her the High Priestess of Babylon, but her faith was tried when she first showed signs of infection. Her cough became a mix of phlegm and blood. Her Ghostface disappears June 18th, 1993. At first glance, Jed Olson was a modest and enthusiastic freelancer with experience in a variety of small newspapers. The staff of the Roosevelt Gazette appreciated how easygoing and honest he seemed, and so he was treated as a stranger for no more than 5 minutes into his interview. Jed quickly spotted the editor-in-chief in the room, gave him a smile and a firm handshake, and talked about good old American values. And that was it. He was an ex-contributor at the Roosevelt Gazette. Olson would never justified his erratic career path, which zigzagged between several small towns from Utah to Pennsylvania. There was no verification of his previous jobs. He had a decent portfolio plus a good attitude, and they needed a contributor right away. The Roosevelt murders. Olson had been working at the paper for 5 months when the Roosevelt murders began. Victims from young to old stabbed to death in their homes. From the reports, the victims seemed chosen at random, yet the killer knew their way around the house. The multiple stab wounds indicated a personal motive. No traces of DNA were found. The local police were confounded. The murders were carried with a fury akin to a crime of passion, yet coldly premeditated. The killer also liked to stalk his targets. 2 victims had reported being followed on the way home by a dark figure. A few days prior to the death, the killer would follow them from Wally's, a small bar in North Roseville, and snap pictures of them at home. While looking for a way in, he could watch the same victim for weeks, meticulously registering their habits and routines. When he felt the urge to kill, he'd visit the most vulnerable victim on his list and break inside their house quietly. The whole staff worked on the Roseville murders story. Olson was often sent to interview the family of the victims and relay official statements from the police. Unknown to everyone at the time, his involvement added to the final body count. The Ghostface. Panic swelled in Roseville when Olson produced footage of a hooded figure breaking into the house at night. The masked fake face, a white blur in the dark, stayed at the camera for a second before disappearing inside. The Ghostface caught on tape was a resulting article written by Olson. He seemed proud of his work at the time, enjoying how the whole town feared his ghost stories. Weeks later, Olson left a note on his desk and disappeared. I hope you like my stories. I enjoy bringing them to life. Don't worry, I'm not done. Jed Olson. The Roseville law enforcement still refused to comment as Jed Olson remains at large. Danny smiled, ripping out the article from the newspaper. When the investigation had been pointed to him, he packed his bags and left Roseville swiftly. He climbed up the clammy seat, pulling his skin, and oppressive humidity engulfed him as he entered the bedroom. Condensation dribbled on a small misted-up window as cracks of wallpaper hung limply. His floral pattern was covered in gruesome photos and newspaper headlines. Danny pinned the old week article on the top of a picture of lacerated scalps. A faint pang of hunger hit him, and he wondered when he had eaten last. Was it this morning while washing his knife and clothes, or was it last night after following that girl down the street? He couldn't remember. Taking a step back, he admired his wall. His mind drifted, remembering all the articles he'd written, the stories he planned, and the scenes he brought to life. A shiver ran through him. A chilling breeze transformed the bedroom's humidity into an opaque, freezing fog. A woman shrieked. Dead leaves crunched under his feet. He smiled in anticipation. The Demogorgon. A blooming mouth full of needle-like teeth for a face, a large curved, razor-sharp claws, and powerful legs to pounce on victims, make the Demogorgon a frightening monster to face in any dimension. It is a nightmare of unrestrained feral rage as it hunts down its prey and rips it to pieces, devouring every last morsel of flesh and gore, leaving nothing for scavengers. The creature is untouched by any sense of compassion or restraint. Looming over his victim, it shows no doubt or mercy, just the pure instinct of insatiable bloodlust as it delivers the death blow. A perfect hunter, the Demogorgon is a macabre testament to the horrors lurking in the Upside Down, and why it was choice pickings for the entity. The Oni. Apologize for any mispronunciations in this one. Honor in his family's name was never enough for Kasanya Mioka. He wanted his towards town, he suddenly found himself face to face with a samurai standing on a dirt road, blocking his way. Kazan readied his Cannibal. Without a word, the samurai attacked and quickly secured the upper hand, but he hesitated. With a devastating blow, Kazan crushed the samurai's head and cracked his helmet. As Kazan approached the fallen samurai, he saw his father's face and staggered back in his haunches. His father stared at Kazan with mingled shame and regret as he issued his last breath. Kazan closed his eyes and screamed in agony until he could scream no more. When he opened his eyes again, his father was gone. Not only had he killed his father, but he had allowed thieves to steal his body for armor. Bitter, lost, and disillusioned, Kazan roamed the land aimlessly with his father's voice rattling in his head, taunting him, reminding him of his failures, sending him into fits of uncontrollable black rage. One day, walking into the woods, Kazan happened upon an Oni statue. He stopped and stood motionless for a long moment. The weathered, overgrown statue seemed to be ridiculing him, accusing him of being the imposter samurai he so desperately sought to destroy. Kazan shook the laughing voice out of his head and remembered the lord who had ridiculed him as Oni Yamaoka. With renewed anger, Kazan journeyed to a town high up in the snowy mountains where the lord resided. A dozen samurai met Kazan at the gates of the town. A dozen samurai fell to his Cannibal. His speed and strength unmatched, his rage incomprehensible. Covered in blood and gore, Kazan battled through the town and soon found the lord hiding in a villa. He dragged him out of his cabinet, sliced his tendons to immobilize him, and watched him beg and squirm like a dog. Without hesitation, he thrust his fist in the lord's mouth and yanked the wicked tongue that desecrated his name. Satisfied, Kazan exited the villa to find himself surrounded by a dozen farmers wielding rusted scythes, sharp pitchforks, and heavy clubs. He survived the first few assaults, but there were too many attackers coming from every direction. Within moments, Kazan was on the ground, staring at a cold, indifferent, darkening sky, as farmers took turns stabbing and torturing the Oni, who had butchered their beloved lord. The frenzied mob dragged Kazan into a small stone mill to continue the torture and finally left him to die a slow, agonizing death. When they returned, the mill was filled with a black fog, and Kazan's body and Cannibal were nowhere to be found. It was the beginning of a dark legend about a rageful Oni haunting the town. The Deathslinger. Born in the dust-ridden badlands of the American Midwest, Caleb Quinn was the son of a struggling Irish immigrant. On the edge of the frontier, sickness, famine, and death were common sights, and pioneers contended for whatever scraps they could claim while tycoons feasted. Caleb's father, once an engineer, had few options to ply in his trade, as businesses posted a common sign, "No Irish need apply." His antiquated tools laid untouched for years until Caleb uncovered them. Noticing his son's interest in the trade, he gifted him his old wrench. The device Caleb made under his father's guidance had quaint applications, but while his father was away, they took a grim turn. He had plans for a mask that would gouge barbed needles into human eyes and rip them from their sockets, complete with sketches of it fitted on boys who bullied him. With age, Caleb's engineering abilities became marketable, and employers put their discrimination aside. Henry Micheal, the owner of West Rail, hired him. Caleb first invented a gun that shot railroad spikes into the ground. Next, he made a steam-powered tunneling drill, but as Micheal feigned indifference, the devices began turning up at other countries, the patents stolen from Caleb and sold. A familiar sensation coursed through Caleb's blood, feeding the sharp pain in his heart. Rage overwhelmed him. He burst into Micheal's office and smashed his face into a bloody stew. As he was pulled away, he pushed his specialized gun into his paws and squeezed the trigger. A railroad spike plowed through skin and viscera, nailing Micheal to his desk. The only thing that saved Caleb from hanging was Micheal's unlikely survival. For 15 years, Caleb was confined to Hellshire Penitentiary, the nation's first private prison in a fortress of illiterate convicts. He found an unlikely friend in the educated prison warden. He designed torture devices for him and in return received extra meals. swarmed the warden, snapping bones of each kick. When the two broken men, begging for death, the posse dragged them into the commons where they were left with a growing crowd of prisoners. Soaking in blood and sweat, Caleb hobbled to his old cell, hardly paying attention to Micheal's screams. He sat on the bed as drops of blood rang from his fingertips. A thick, unnatural fog steamed through the barred windows. He pulled out his old wrench, cracked and rusted, and ran a thumb along the metal. Regarding it with faded eyes, he couldn't remember when it came into his possession. He didn't care to remember. At his feet, he saw a dusty path. At his end, silhouettes of all that had done him wrong. The boys who had bullied him, the executives who took advantage of him, and again, Henry Micheal, emerging from the fog with tools to dispose of him. Unforgiving steel looks, brilliant and beautiful in their simplicity. Pain tore through the leg as he stood, but he endured, pushing onwards and walking the dusty path, leaving a trail of blood following behind him. The executioner. A sadistic and merciless executioner, Pyramid Head is fixated on dispensing punishment for a pain, encumbered by the steel frame upon his head, and with a hulking great blade in tow, he stalked the hellish corridors of Silent Hill, committed to a duty that no one truly understood. Where he trod, even monsters fled to the shadows, and those who crossed his path fell victim to unrestrained acts of aggression. When his duty was complete and his presence no longer needed, he prepared for a long rest, and yet his skills were required elsewhere. The fog that streamed over him was somehow different than that he was accustomed to in Silent Hill, as if each whisper contained the nerves of a creature writhing, seeking him out. There was unspoken agreement in that moment. The billowing cloud was an invitation to a duty and sadism, and Pyramid Head, taking a step into the fog, accepted his obligation once more. And that about wraps up today's